Good morning, everyone. Bienvenue à tous et à toutes. Mon nom est Louis Marcotte. Je suis champion d'Objectif 2020 ici au ministère. J'aimerais également souhaiter la bienvenue à ceux et celles qui se joignent à nous par téléconférence et vidéoconférence. En tant que champion d'Objectif 2020, l'un de mes buts principaux consiste à promouvoir la mise en place des conditions nécessaires afin de faire d'Affaires mondiales Canada une organisation des plus performantes au service des Canadiens. This obviously can be achieved in multiple ways, and the Blueprint 2020 vision calls for an open and networked environment that engages citizens and partners. It is in this context that we've organized this event today so that we can learn from experts in the field and senior management on how high-performing organizations achieve outcomes that surpass their peers. I'd like to invite Mr. David Morrison, Associate Deputy Ministers, to introduce our panel today, as well as Rasha Alkata, Senior Policy Analyst here at GAC, who will facilitate the discussion. Thank you.
Merci et bonjour tout le monde. Aujourd'hui, nous sommes ici pour apprendre de la part d'experts ce qui font les organisations pour être plus performantes. Je voudrais mettre l'accent dans le plus dans plus performant, parce que nous appartenons déjà à une fonction publique considérée par l'Institut de gouvernement basé au Royaume-Uni comme la fonction publique la plus efficace au monde. Nous devrions tous être fiers, mais nous savons aussi que nous pouvons toujours faire mieux. So we're already great, and these folks are going to talk to us a little bit about their experience from the outside of the Canadian Public Service in what really drives high-performing organizations. In the spirit of Blueprint 2020 and innovation and doing things a little bit differently, we only have an hour, and someone out there wrote a really great set of points for me that I'm not going to use because I don't want to take up as much time as that would take away from the panel. Let me just say that just a couple of observations. I think they're going to talk about technology, which we all need to think about and talk about in terms of what enables performance. We did a session over in 111 Sussex late last week on something we're calling Mission of the Future, and there was a lot of talk about new technologies and how those would influence the jobs we do here at headquarters and the jobs that we do overseas. But I actually think that culture is more important than technology in highly performing organizations. I think that trust and curiosity and other sort of intangible cultural elements are what really makes for a highly performing organization. But don't listen to me because that's just my personal view. But I have actually worked personally in a number of different organizations around the world that don't have anything to do with the Canadian Public Service. So I've been up close in private sector organizations, in NGOs, in the UN, and in the Canadian government. So I do have personal views on what works and what doesn't, and I'd love to hear views on culture. Our guests today are Jen Hunter, Senior Manager at Deloitte Greenhouse, Murray Cronick, National Service Leader for Performance Measurement. That gets the heart racing for those of us from CETA backgrounds. At Interis, and Interis BDO and a visiting professor at the Telfer School of Management, and notre propre Francis Trudel, sous-ministre adjoint des ressources humaines ici à Affaires mondiales Canada. And as was already said, we're delighted to have Rasha Alkata from the policy branch as the panel's moderator. I will turn it over to Rasha. Thank you.
Merci David pour cette introduction et cet accueil chaleureux. Ça fait plaisir d'être aussi aujourd'hui avec vous autres. So my name is Rachel Akata and I will be the panel moderator. And honestly, just from chatting with our panelists, I'm honored and privileged to be sitting around such distinguished colleagues. Before we start the conversation, I want to give a little bit of role play of what we need to expect for today. So first off, we'll start off with a presentation from each of our guests, and then we'll open it up to questions. For colleagues at Mission, please email your questions to the Blueprint 2020 team at 2020@international.gc.ca. Les employés des missions et des bureaux régionaux sont invités à envoyer leurs questions par courriel à l'équipe d'Objectif 2020. Immédiatement après les périodes des questions, il y aura une séance porte ouverte au centre de collaboration. So today's discussion is really meant to be the start of the conversation. It's not the end, it's just, the first step in this ongoing journey as we look at how we can make Global Affairs Canada the potential that it has to be a really high-performing organization. So it really is the start of a journey. And what better to start us off with than Jen Hunter? So as David mentioned, she is a senior manager at Deloitte and also recently published a hot-off-the-press business chemistry book that I'm sure Deloitte did,
to be clear.
which she shared, and so it's hot off the press. A lot of key findings, key thinking, and it's something that's a real passion of hers. So we're very privileged, and the style of her presentation is called a Pecha Kucha style. Raise your hand if you've ever heard that word before. Okay, well, it was my first time. So I figured some people may not know what that is. So it's a Japanese-style presentation of 20 slides shown for 20 seconds each. So we're not going to go running off script here. Jen's going to be on the ball. So Jen, over to you.
Great. Thank you very much. It is a delight to be here, and let's see. So I'm going to press this. Correct? Okay. So, and I'm going to get my clock going because that's actually part of this equation. So, by background, I'm a facilitator, and this is Pecha Kucha-esque, to be fair. The first 20 seconds, I just wanted to share with you, Deloitte has recently published, and annually we do a global exploration of what's happening on human capital trends. Some of you may be familiar with it. It's always fun to see nods. We work hard, and we do some serious research on this, and this particular image simply shows that there is we live in interesting times. Everyone's familiar with this concept, correct? Things are changing, the pace of change. I've literally heard it my entire career for 25 years. The pace of change is going faster. And what's important to realize is that at this point, technology is a little bit outpacing us. That's our first yellow one at the top. Next are individuals. The one further down is a building to represent organizations, and then we see public policy. The purpose of sharing this with you by way of context is it's hard to build high-performing organizations in this climate because there are a ton of outside pressures. We're noticing an increase on outside pressures. I'm going to go to my next image. And what we're suggesting is a trend to watch and something to explore if you want to see a nudge into the future, is that what's happening on the left axis is we're moving more and more towards ecosystems, and on the bottom axis we're moving more and more towards team of teams. You want to be aware of this and what it's actually going to culminate in. Those of us who are social entrepreneurs will be pleased, the rise of the social enterprise in all organizations. Organizations that are, I'm going to press the wrong one. Organizations that are fundamentally grabbing societal needs and human longings to contribute talent. That is a place of bliss. Oh, there's a typo, John, on our slide. So bliss, B-L-I-S-S. And so that's what you want to look for, is where does the world have a need and you have a contribution to make, and we hit this place of bliss. And that's what social organizations, social enterprises are really founded on. I, many years ago, wrote the exam to work here. So I envy you having careers at this esteemed place, and I'm appreciative of the work you do. Please watch these next slides. I'm going to make up some time here. Tell me what you see in the next 5 slides. Yell it out. What else? Just yell it out. This is your part. What's happening? Yes. So all of those images are really the work that I do. I work for the Greenhouse. We are focused squarely in the domain of breakthroughs. So those are all images from my perspective of breakthroughs. And really what we work with is high-performing teams and high-performing organizations who know we live in interesting times and aren't afraid to lean in. So fundamentally, what I'm going to spend the last 4 minutes of my time, with you is sharing with you what we call the ingredients for breakthroughs. So there are 10 ingredients. They're all on this slide, but I'll give you, you will have access to this. And by the way, for those who are very detail-oriented, we call them guardians in our system. Please call me for a coffee because 7 minutes isn't enough for me to share with you the full recipe, but here is some of the DNA for breakthroughs. First and foremost, and I would like you to now listen for where's a breakthrough you would like to have in your work that you do as leaders in this conversation, and where is the condition that most resonates for you, okay, as I speak to these next slides. So where do you want to have a breakthrough, and what's the condition that resonates most? So strip away everything. This is a fundamental premise that we are finding in living in interesting times, is we need to make sure that we don't get caught in the way it once was. This is a challenge. I will leave it at that. The second one is actually to silence the cynic. Many meetings I go to, I'm a professional designer and facilitator, I get asked to come to help teams that get stuck. Often we get stuck living in the ghosts of years gone by, conflicts gone by, the past. Those ghosts, if they are informative and helpful, can be of value, but they often drag us down. I would suggest silencing the cynic is really an important part of designing a future we all want to live into. The third distinction is to make a mess. This one makes people very uncomfortable, but I work in the greenhouse, right? So there's a natural analogy. But making a mess is really, many of you, let's see, show hands. How many of you have heard of or work agilely? Agilely, yes. Look around and see those people, go for coffee with them. Working agile, creating prototypes, not getting stuck, doing iterative work. This is actually the work that we are seeing as most significant to getting us through. Days of waterfall are gone. We now need to design differently. Let me just check, 2 minutes, good. And this one, can anyone tell me what the green says? Not greenhouse part, but the green on the right. Right, live with the problem. Not so good at this. We're not so good at this. Leaders, we're not so good at this. We get rewarded generally as leaders to fix things, not to live with them. It's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to live with the problem. I would recommend, this is often a place of deep breakthrough. If you're able to bring a team together and not rush to the first obvious answer, but actually work in the collaboration center here, make sure you're taking the time, making sure you're actually staying with the conversation over time, you will see great, great, great opportunities for breakthrough. This one, Get Real, I quite like. This is that little baby, naked baby was my naked baby, by the way, many years ago. So the idea of actually shedding this glossy veneer and getting real is a very critical distinction, and actually remembering that we live in human systems, and our human systems are full of knotted, gnarly messes. We are not perfect. We should not expect to be doing things that are perfect. We should be working with the beautiful imperfections. Friends of mine call it beautiful constraints. How do we work with our deep humanity to create futures worth living into? And in listing a motley crew, fundamentally this one I'm seeing in Ottawa as a massive, massive breakthrough. I work at the Innovation Center. The more permeable you see your boundaries as, the more likely you are to notice and hear different opportunities, different insights, different possibilities. Innovation isn't creating from net new. It is actually taking something that works elsewhere and applying it in a new context. So in listing a motley crew, people already have great answers who can actually apply them in unique situations and can give you a leg up is hugely helpful. So check your edge. I feel this one kind of speaks for itself. I don't know, it looks kind of awkward and scary, and it should. Sometimes it's terrifying to go to the edge. This one is best personified by DeWitt Jones when he says, it's not just going to the edge of my work, it's going to the edge of myself. When I'm leading, it's actually being uncomfortable with the next iteration of Jen. So going to the edge, 8 seconds, okay, and I have a closing thing. So don't play nice. It's very important to call out the elephants and make sure that when you're in a conversation, the stuff doesn't stay unsaid. The breakthrough often lives here. It often lives in the thing that's actually lurking in the room and everyone's being quiet about. This is notoriously present in Ottawa, by the way. As an outsider, I'll say, Shakespeare brings dial up the drama. In the greenhouse, we create experiences. So fundamentally moving from, we call them boring old meetings or bombs, to well-organized and run meetings, which are worms. Greenhouse are experiences. We live in an experience economy, and it's time to take it up a notch. and fundamentally shatter the plan, evolve, and make a dent by making some change. I will leave you with this provocation. It's actually, I realized, I was teasing Murray in my mind ahead of time. It's a provocation for myself as well, Murray. I was like, I think the era of checklists is gone. So a checklist for high-performing organizations, I think we now live in the era of DNA. So there you go, mic drop. Jen Hunter, Greenhouse, let's go. Cheers.
Thank you very much, Jen. I appreciate you referring to detail-oriented people as guardians and not pedantic. So that's always good to hear. So a lot of key takeaways, including ingredients for breakthroughs, not getting caught up in the ways things were once, silencing our critics, iterative ways of working, beautiful constraints, and going to the edge of ourselves. So I think there's a lot of key takeaways there. And a great, start to Murray's presentation next. So we're also privileged to be joined by Murray Kronick, who's a senior manager at Interest BDO and visiting professor at the Telfer School of Management. Murray has over 30 years of experience in management consulting and will be here to share more wisdom with us. Thank you, Murray.
Great, thank you. Try it again, there we go. So I will tell you right now, I don't have any bare babies' bottoms in my presentation.
Sorry.
But I may have other things. Let me borrow that if I can. And we'll get the slide presentation up. Let me just tell you what I will show you. Here we go. So what I really do want to show you is very much some of the principles, and I may have a checklist or two. I will say I have one of those in there because they are helpful from time to time. And so what you'll find is I'm going to show you some of the fundamentals. And so one of the first fundamentals, which has been around for a little while, is a definition. And so we need a definition of what the heck is a high-performing organization, because without that, how will we know if we've ever achieved it? And so you can see it's something that achieves very significant results. This plays nicely into the policy on results, by the way, given that we're working under, I call it the new policy on results, but it's almost 2 years old now. But being clear on what we're actually trying to achieve and making sure that we are not only achieving those results, but even exceeding them, exceeding expectations of either you within this department or your clients or the people that you serve in many different ways, whether it's at the missions or within Canada. And the other thing is it's a long-term perspective. So it's not, what do I have to do this quarter or this year, but how are we doing in terms of changing our organization to becoming a greater and higher performing organization over that long term. Now, we've all heard buzzwords before, right? Jen and I are in the buzzword business to some extent of creating new expressions and things like that, where we've heard excellence or world-class or those kind of things. In many cases, folks view them as synonymous. The one difference that we see at Telfer School, and I've worked with Greg Richards, who's the director of the MBA program, very closely on this. He was, in fact, the original speaker for today. He's in Vienna working on some of this stuff, so he asked me to pinch hit. But it's the notion that there is a structured approach to making this happen, and that there are, in fact, some key notions, key elements that need to be put in place in order to actually be a high-performing organization. So that's what I want to show you next. And so, in fact, some of the characteristics, I'm not sure if you can read that, but there are, in fact, 5 key characteristics. It's actually referred to, the graphic is called the windmill, because you can see the reference at the bottom. The gentleman who created this is Dutch. And so he said, I have to make a windmill out of this. And so that's his notion of making it happen. And in fact, I just want to point out a couple of things. First and foremost is the quality of management. And I extracted a couple of the key points from that one that I wanted to really emphasize, such as trust and integrity. Without trust and integrity, you have nothing, right? What you say is what you do is really what's behind that. And I have a quote on that coming up in just a moment. Even speed, right? The speed in which we actually take decisions and take actions, very important to being a high-performing organization. When we think of a bureaucratic approach, do we think of speed? Generally not, right? If I could be blunt about that, right? And so can we do something to make things faster, still keep the same quality of decisions and actions, but if we can in fact make them faster, there is value in doing that. And everyone knows the expression time is money, very important in making that happen as well. I'm not going to go through all of them. I just wanted to point out this model, and you do have the reference for further information. And in fact, Jonathan had mentioned, in fact, that you are looking at elements of this model to implement within this organization, within global affairs. So that's really good, and it is considered to be, if not the leading model, certainly one of the leading models along the way. So that's really great. I did want to give you a quote on this one. When you have trust, you do not need to see all of the stairs to climb the first step. And so it's the notion of, I believe that we are headed in the right direction. I will take that first step, not necessarily knowing what's way out there. And of course, it's Martin Luther King who had said that, right? A pretty good fellow for a quote. Okay, who thinks high-performance organizations is a new notion? Anybody? No? You think it's been around for a while? Okay, I'll prove to you that it's been around for a while. 10 years ago, there was a Prime Minister's Advisory Committee to the Public Service. Two gentlemen by the name of Mazinkowski, Don Mazinkowski, and Paul Tellier. You may have known them at some point in time. They actually wrote a couple of reports on how do you do a high-performing public service. And it was very HR-oriented, you'll be very happy to know that, and it was very much focused on how do we do managerial activities better, make decisions better, and how do we get staff to actually react and work well together. And so I've literally just copied and pasted some of their key recommendations in that. And so one of the ones, the first one that's there I wanted to point out, has the encouragement and the ability to innovate. So you mentioned innovation, the notion of going beyond your comfort zone. That notion is extremely important. Even within the context, the constraints, whether it's a Treasury Board requirement, whether it's a policy within the department, whatever it is, we understand that you have constraints, but you still have to be innovative within those constraints and still break through them and go to the edge of the cliff in some way, right? And so again, I'll leave those for you. I've given you the reference as well if you want to see the full report. But it was interesting, in my case, preparing for this, to go back 10 years and see that the principles are still valid, are still appropriate. Last thing I wanted to show you here was Greg Richards' model of high-performing organizations, which I helped him create, which really deal with some of the same elements. The notion of strategic clarity. Are we clear where we're headed? If we're not clear, I'm going to quote somebody else not as famous as Martin Luther King, Alice in Wonderland. When you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. Okay, so without that strategic clarity, which road do we take when we're at a fork in the road? Which do we take? Elements around flawless execution. Are we clear in making things happen clearly, succinctly, and validly along the way? The notion of aligning resources with strategy. When we allocate resources, whether it be people, money, any of the resources we have, are we clear in aligning that with where we want to go? The notion of continuous monitoring is absolutely crucial, and it links to the next slide I'm going to have around the Plan, Do, Check, Act slide. But without monitoring, we don't take corrective action. We don't know if we're on track or not. And we can't make those management decisions to get us back on track or to keep doing more of the same if, in fact, we're in good shape. And the last one is the whole notion of culture, already mentioned, right? So again, I'm just showing this particular slide, and I'll just put them all of the notions up here. I simply have a question. Anybody hear of this, by the way, the Plan, Do, Check, Act before? Yeah? So the notion is you need strategic planning to set the vision. You actually operate or do for a while. You actually check to see how are we doing for a while, and then you make management decisions, which is the act. I'm going to throw this question out. I'm not looking for an answer. We could always discuss it in the question period because I know I'm running short of time. How much time do you spend in each of these four? How much time do you spend planning versus doing versus checking versus acting? And a well-structured, high-performing organization spends significant amount of time in not just the doing part. Everyone knows that that's the majority of time anyways, but in fact, the planning, the checking, and the acting is in fact an important portion of time. And if you allocate the right amount of time for that, you become a higher performing organization. I'm going to leave you with something that a couple of quotes that I heard, I think it's 3 weeks ago now. I'm also the past president and a board member of PPX, the Performance and Planning Exchange. I had the huge honor of having the Director of Olympic Performance for the Canadian Olympic Committee come and talk to us. I had arranged for him to talk to us. And we called his talk, How to Measure the Success of Canada's Olympic Games Effort Beyond Just the Medal Count. And he had some brilliant insights in how he gets Team Canada together, our team of athletes who represented us in Pyeongchang back in February and previously in Rio in the Summer Olympics. And he gave us 3 quotes that I wrote down, just like you've written down some of the key ones. I wrote down these 3. First one, have clarity in your mission. Not the missions like the embassies, but clarity in your vision, right? And without that, you're just not going to head in the right direction, or you'll head in multiple directions. The second one, I love this as an Olympic athlete, whether you get the gold medal or not, he's saying it's what we do every day that defines us. Every time we wake up in the morning and say, this is what I'm going to accomplish today, that's what tells us whether we as individuals and we as an organization are successful. And the last thought is, again, about culture. Notice a theme here? If you don't invest in your culture, you'll get one anyway. Isn't that brilliant? As I said, all I can take credit for is writing it down when he said it. But it was a very effective way of looking at how does our Team Canada athletes do, and how do, in fact, we perform and we respond. And that's what I've got. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Murray, for that. I think we just have to do a little switcheroo. Mike's there. There we go. So between Jen's insights and Murray's insights in terms of the characteristics and the ingredients that we need for a high-performance organization, I think that it sets a really good base of the theory of, you know, what are we looking for and what do we mean when we think of high-performance organization. Murray, I was especially struck by your point that we need to align resources with where we want to go and not necessarily where we've been. And I think that's something really important for us to keep at the back of our minds as we go on the conversation. And now moving it to our distinguished colleague Francis Trudel. Francis, au regard des commentaires de Jen et Murray et en votre capacité de sous-ministre adjoint des ressources humaines, pouvez-vous partager avec nous les points de vue d'affaires mondiales sur cette question and where we're going in this thinking? Thank you.
Thank you for this. Thank you for our guests. This was very inspiring. And thank you for the invitation to be here. I thought I had the easy task, which they told me to come and just react to a little bit and just get into questions. And as I was scribbling down things, I could speak for an hour and reacting to things we could be doing, things we are doing. And so I'm going to hesitate to go too deep into it because I want to allow some time. But first thing I'd say, it's quite daunting, actually, for an organization to have presentation on a high-performing organization and best practice, because we have the tendency of either kind of saying, well, that really don't apply to us, or the reverse reaction, which is, in French we say autoflagellation, autoflagellating ourselves, which we probably should be somewhere in the middle. I have to give ourselves credit a little bit. Just reacting to a couple of things I've heard. The first thing that struck me was I was thinking I was going to hear so much more about technology issues, and it was actually very people-driven. It talks about behavior, it talks about communication, it talks about people, which is actually kind of reassuring at many levels, because some of this is actually within reach when it is actually in an organization that could be limited in other aspects of things, such as maybe technology is. L'autre élément qui m'a frappé, c'est lorsque j'ai vu la documentation, je ne sais pas si vous avez remarqué, les analyses qui ont été faites en partie sur la présentation de Murray. On parle d'une analyse de 1500 organisations globales. Donc, je m'attendais à avoir une espèce de shopping list là, de bonnes actions. En fait, il y a des tendances faciles à regrouper, ça me semble assez. Et à l'intérieur de ça, il y a différentes organisations avec multiples cultures. Donc, on doit pouvoir s'y associer un petit peu. You're talking about quality of management. You're talking about leadership, you're talking quality of people. Sounds to me that we're tackling the right issues. The how we're going about it, I think we have to keep ourselves honest. There's still a lot of progress to be made at many fronts, but I've been in this department now for about 12 years. I've worked elsewhere before, and if there was one place that I think we have made progress, or I've seen investment in time and progress, is kind of creating accountability on our senior manager. It's not always visible, but there's efforts into kind of creating accountability to it, which is one of the best practices you've mentioned. We are very lucky as an institution on the quality of people thing, and I'm not saying this because there's a crowd in front of me. This is a privileged organization where it's a destination department. People want to come and work here, and people who are here actually wants to stay here. They want changes to the organization, but they still very much wanting to work here, which brings a high level of professionalism and dedication and commitment, and so we're very lucky into that. The reverse aspect of this, of course, is when people want to come and they don't want to leave, that means they don't leave, and that means there's not much mobility in it. There's a certain level of stagnation, so we have to get into other type of good practices, which is offering things that go beyond just advancement and promotion, because those are limited in our actual structure. Mm-hmm. Continuous improvement, continuous training development are actually part of those, part of the equation. J'ai été aussi frappé par les composantes qui sont directes ou indirectement reliées aux aspects de communication. Un autre défi assez majeur au niveau organisationnel ici. On a une structure passablement senior, séparée par plusieurs secteurs d'activité, plusieurs sous-ministres. Il y a beaucoup de communication qui se fait, mais pas toujours visible à l'ensemble de l'organisation. Il y a des secteurs d'activité qui sont plus horizontales. J'en suis un, les ressources humaines qui touchent à tout le monde. Je ne pense pas qu'il y a une semaine qui passe sans que j'ai au moins 2 activités comme celle-ci, là, ou soit dans des town halls ou dans des secteurs où on a des conversations. My takeaway from what I've heard on that specific point is we have to stop thinking as senior managers, or senior managers have to stop thinking that this is like a side of the desk gig thing. This is actually part and parcel of the job of senior managers. How will they see the stairs if senior managers are not telling them that direction? And so that to me is a takeaway. This is not just something you do in addition. No, that's actually your job. It's actually part of your job. I would say something we need to do better at the department in creating more visibility on things. I scribbled down a couple of other reaction. I'm always hesitant when we're getting into comparing private to public sector. We have a very strong culture here. We talk about culture, and I'm not talking about the GAC culture. I'm talking a big public service culture, which is highly bureaucratized. Like some of you have heard me say this before. Where do you think those Dilbert cartoons come from, right? I mean, like we've created that industry, right? It's us. So it's very real. So the reaction to our own culture and the comparator to private and public, and this is just my own opinion, we have the tendency to say, well, you know, if we were structured like the private sector, if we were not playing with people's money or taxpayers' money, we would be making different choices. I think that's an easy way out. We actually have to challenge ourselves. At the same time, there's some truth to that. You know, the day that a private sector organization will have their board of governors of 36 million people that have to render, a response to that would be a little bit different. But I guess my lessons learned on we have to stop being defensive about that. There's different ways to do things out there, and it's not. Yes, we're part of a bigger family of 300,000 people, which is public service, and yes, we have an employer that is Treasury Board that is not our department. Those are too often excuses. We need a tabula rasa sometimes a little bit and re-question the parameters in which we're managed into. I could go on and on. J'ai plutôt l'intention de faire une pause et peut-être avec nos invités prendre des questions des gens qui veulent parler soit à nos experts ou parler à la réalité ministérielle peut-être.
May I have a minute for one comment as to what
Sure.
said? Je voudrais juste faire un commentaire sur la technologie. In fact, technology as you noticed, was not explicitly mentioned. I view technology and everything that I've seen in the research, technology is the enabler. And it's the enabler for a couple of things that we've both mentioned. One is the speed in which you can get the information to make the decision, and the other is actually informing that decision. And so if you view technology as the enabler to making those things happen, it fits, but it's less visible.
Yeah, makes sense.
Merci beaucoup, Francis. If we can just give all of our panelists another round of applause, please. Thank you. I know we've definitely, have a lot of things to think about and kind of take back to our teams, and it is really the start of the conversation. Today is just the first step in the ongoing climb up that staircase. So we're now going to take questions from the audience. I'm very conscious of the time. We have about 20 minutes or so. So I'll invite our colleagues in the audience to please come up to any of the 4 mics to ask their questions. Et un autre rappel que les employés des missions et des bureaux régionaux sont invités à envoyer leurs questions par courriel à l'équipe d'Objectif 2020. So I could please ask our colleagues if they have any questions to come up to the mics now. If not, I have a whole list. So
Front row. Yes.
Bonjour, merci beaucoup pour ces excellentes interventions. My name is Stuart Savage. I work with the Blueprint 2020 team, so obviously very vested and interested in what you have to say here today in supporting Global Affairs become a more high-performing organization. You talked a little bit about longer-term vision and clarity. I'm wondering if you could expand on that a little bit, especially in the context of a public service that works for governments, which have fixed terms.
I'm happy to. Yeah, and please add. Yeah, it's absolutely a problem, and the notion that a government has to be re-elected every 4 years is in fact a constraint under which you work. I would still argue that having a long-term vision for the department, for what you're trying to achieve, in fact, and I worked with Global Affairs a number of times over the years, you do have a pretty clear vision as to what you're trying to achieve. All of the elements in which you have put together your most recent departmental results are clear around what you are trying to achieve in the short, medium, and even longer term. Now, will those things change as governments change? Absolutely they will. And it's just a fact of life that you and every other department has to deal with in one way, shape, or form. But if you view that as we still have a long-term goal given what we're trying to achieve, our mission and our vision, and will that adjust a bit? Will trade change as things go forward? Sure. But so many aspects of the business likely are more stable. Consular affairs, I would think, is fairly stable. You'll react to different things that happen politically or natural disasters or whatever the case may be, but you should still have that long-term vision and reach out as far as you can. That way you increase the amount of stability that you'll have over the longer term.
If I can just jump in here too, I think the other thing I would point to is there's a tension always in any organization I've ever worked with around your personal vision and the organizational vision. And I think part of the life work we all have as professionals to navigate that tension well. And I actually encourage leaders, especially when they're starting, to recognize that sometimes the best place to have a breakthrough is in a breakdown, where your own values, your own bliss is actually out of sync with the organization, and then figure out how do we have these conversations well. Because there's a lot to be said. There's a whole movement in the sort of foresight world now around sensing and shaping. And if you take the natural metaphor of fish, if you look into I love watching fish in a lake. And so if you watch a group, they often travel in packs. And so if you watch fish, they don't move, they move together and they move quickly. But there's a sensing and shaping to that we also have that we are only starting to remember, I think. And I think there's probably also, by the way, I'll give a shout out, there's probably some incredible wisdom in some of the people who lived here before us around some of that stuff, where we could regain some wisdom that we didn't bring with us, those of us who came over here from other places. The thought.
Thank you very much, Marie and Jen. Mike 3.
Ashley Jean-Marie. I serve on the innovation desk, so the innovation topic is really close to my heart. But perhaps just some context before my question. In terms of definition for high-performing organizations, the Forbes top employers are also known to be Canada's top-performing organizations. And I've had the privilege to interview some of the CEOs of those companies as part of the Telfer MBA program. And what we actually found was that those companies have achieved one thing: to align their employees' sense of purpose to the organization's objectives. Perhaps back to your point, Jen, and I guess where I'm leading with my question is, how difficult would it be for an organization like Global Affairs and perhaps the Government of Canada in general to sort of increase that meaning quotient, really, for an organization like Global Affairs, because that's a gigantic organization. And when we look at it in terms of functions, we can find in this organization from maternal newborn to, I don't know, international security to multi-billion-dollar companies. In terms of, those are the things shaping the culture of this organization. How do you align the organization's objectives with its employees' core purpose? Thank you.
If I can ask Jen to speak, and then Francis, maybe if you could give us some insights to Gac's thinking as well.
So I love these questions. They're brilliant. Both so far love them. So I think you made a great point that underscored, and I'm sorry, I didn't get your name. What's your name? Sorry, I apologize. I'm a real people person. I'm like, what's your name?
Ashley Jean-Marie.
Ashley? Yeah. Okay, great. So I love that. I love that you pointed to the relationship between top employers and top organizations, and that's a trend we're noticing. And I just want to say, Francis pointed out, and I also did say, I tried that test. It was hard. I got very close to getting here when I was 21 or 22. So it's an honorable way to take, like you have a profound contribution you're making. And every day, sometimes you get, I think, weathered. Everybody does, no matter what you're doing. We get acculturated to the greatness that we are. And that's the challenge. That's the edge you have, I will suggest. So if you remember, the work you're doing is incredibly honorable. It's incredibly valuable. It's incredibly valued. And it doesn't always feel that way, no matter where you are. So I just would say, like, maybe put a mantra up by your cubicle and say, I'm here because, we're here because there'll be times it'll be helpful. I do that myself, and it's helpful because you need that fire in yourself to keep alive, and you need to pump each other up when you hit those moments when someone's being a jerk, because there are jerks out there, and I'm a jerk sometimes, so it's helpful to remember that.
I have two quick thoughts to add. The first is, in fact, something you have in your hands today, which is your departmental results framework. Because those departmental results are, in fact, what effectively your vision and your intended results are. And so if all of and I mentioned this earlier in my presentation, if you're aligning your resources to meet those results, if you're all pulling in that same direction, you, in fact, do have some of the tools available to you today. That's my first thought. Second one is a quote, and I won't remember it exactly, but I'll do the best I can. It comes from Jack Welch, who's the former CEO of GE, a huge organization. And he was walking around, management by walking around one day, and he asked one of the janitors or superintendents what that individual was doing. And the response was something to the effect of, I'm helping our planes fly safely. Yeah. It wasn't, I'm sweeping the floor. Because he understood that foreign object damage, the technical term for when something gets sucked into a jet engine, which GE produces, can bring down an aircraft. That's what he understood his job was, not just sweeping the floor. And so to me, that is the best example I can think of strategic alignment.
I'm not sure I have something of great depth to think, but I saw in that in the question of the timelines that we have between mandates, and a thought that I have in the back of my mind when you presented, which is the employment model of the public service, which is, by the way, quite particular, right? You come in very young, you at some point get an indeterminate letter that says you'll work with us for 35 years, you'll be pertinent for 35 years, and here's a commitment of what, $3.5 million to you until the end. Like, this is particular employment model. Throughout this whole period, the organization changed, the mandate changed, their bosses changed, you change as individuals. So keeping an alignment between yourself and your own interests and commitment and the one of the organization, that may be true when you walk in. That might not be true later. That might become true again. So it is a complex. So the only thought that comes back to mind as I'm thinking about this is the engagement and communication with staff about themselves and about the stair journey. I like that analogy. Needs to be continuous, or else like it will move apart. So I don't have great thoughts on this, but I'm thinking our employment model is actually a greater risk to that problematic.
Thank you, Francis. So, as Francis mentioned, the engagement in the conversation will be continuing. In respect of the time that we have, I'll just ask the two question people behind mic 3 to just ask both of your questions at the same time. And then mic 2, so we'll take those 3 questions, and then after, we'll take the mic 4 question. So, mic 3.
Okay. Merci. Bonjour. Mon nom est Nathalie Labonté. I'd like to first thank you, the 3 panelists, for your presentation. And if I may, I'd like to come back to Ms. Hunter's presentation. Thank you for, I think, a really refreshing presentation, because the principle that you laid out are, personally, principle and values that I try to live by every day. And I've been working in the public service for 15 years. So, that being said, appelons un chat. Peut-être que c'est de l'autoflagellation, Monsieur Trudel. I'm not sure, I think we could argue that our organization, not just GAC, but generally the public service, is not really good at rewarding the whistleblowers and the people who actually tell it as it is. And so I'd like to really hear from you, Ms. Hunter and Monsieur Chronic, what are some of the ways you think we could change that, and what are some of the concrete activities that can be done so that the organizational structure truly focus on innovation and not just talk about it. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Natalia, and I'm with the Gender Equality Division, and thank you so much for your panel discussion. And so my question is related to Gender-Based Analysis Plus, which is obviously going to have a huge impact in a lot of the work that we do. And I was wondering if you could speak to how issues of gender, diversity, and inclusion factor into the design and planning of a high-performance organization. Thank you.
Hello, thank you so much for your presentations. My name is Julia Czeszlukowska. I was really struck by the line, if you don't invest in culture, you'll get one anyway. And I really do believe all employees and managers have a role to play in building a productive and constructive workplace culture. And I myself have worked under management that have invested a lot in building that social connectedness and relationships between staff. And I was wondering, what are your experiences and ideas for practical ideas that employees and managers can do to further build that culture in a positive and a constructive way and build those social connections? Thank you.
So if I could just ask Jen to start us off.
Okay, this is going to be another Pechacucha. I love these questions. Bravo. So Natalie, Talia, and Julia, merci. Okay, the first one, what are some of the practices and concrete activities to put in place for real innovation? Secondly, how does inclusion and diversity factor into high performance? And the third one was, what are some concrete ways to further build a positive and high-performing culture? Okay, so I'm going to give one answer for each, and I love these questions, so let's go for lunch. The first one I would say, So there are a pile of practices. One of the practices we have for this one around how do you put in place concrete activities for real innovation is you can't assume one training creates the condition for innovation or kind of breakthroughs or ongoing breakthroughs and that kind of stuff. It is actually like a literacy. And there's no silver bullet. I am holding one book, but I'm like, this is a cognitive diversity tool, and it recognizes we have propensities for. It's very easy to use. It gives a literacy, so it gives you one step, the first step. you can use any first step, but don't stop after one step. That's actually the fundamental thing is many of us have made our careers figuring out what are some steps. So maybe having in the collaboration environment, like a whiteboard full of options. I think you guys are working on that electronically anyway, so for the whole mission community. Secondly, inclusion. Again, the idea of diversity has also been proven, just evidence-based, proven to contribute real value and actually mitigate risk, which is another huge factor that you don't talk about often with high performing, but mitigating risk is a massive thing. And we all have blind spots. So if you have a bunch of people who think the same, were trained the same, have the same language, have the same background, have the same socioeconomic status, have the same sexual orientation, all that, you actually end up with same, right? Not helpful, not innovative, not useful. It just doesn't work. It's not a recipe. It's like having vanilla ice cream, which is fine, but you cannot live on vanilla ice cream. It's not effective. And then the final one, can I do that too? My son would love to, but if you don't invest in culture, okay, practices. Okay, so appreciative inquiry. I would say try looking into appreciative inquiry as a practice. And it may help give you some energy and give you some tool, and there's a whole tool set if you Google it, appreciative inquiry. All right.
Good. So I was making notes because I just want to add to what Jen said, not repeat. So the first questioner asked about rewards. And I have a quick question for everybody. Who thinks that money is a good reward for good performance? Okay. Is a little bit of money good or is a lot of money good? Because part of my trick question is, it depends, right? If we're talking about a small amount of money, it's been proven time and time again that the effect, the motivational effect of a bonus, for example, only lasts days or weeks. Not longer than that. So in fact, what we tend to think of is money as a reward for good performance. Yes, it has some effect, but nowhere near the effect that we think it has. And I would argue, and in fact, Francis, you mentioned this earlier, and I wanted to re-emphasize it, this department of so many departments that I've worked with is passionate about the work that you do. Right? You really believe that you want to change the world in whatever way you can. And I would argue that those intrinsic rewards, that seeing your efforts are actually having an effect in whatever area you work in, is far better than dollars. And by the way, he did not pay me to say that. And so, in fact, the reality is it's a combination of the two that really ends up having a high-performance organization. Yes, you need to be compensated fairly, and there are certain restrictions on that I know that your employer as Treasury Board imposes. But in fact, if you can see that your efforts are being validated and seeing an end effect, that I think will be reinforcing in terms of a high-performance organization more than anything else. So that was one thought. For the gender-based analysis and the other thing about diversity, I'm just going to quote your slide about the motley crew. Because I think that's great. And in fact, when you showed that slide, Jen, I immediately thought of Shopify, because they're known for hiring people with hugely diverse backgrounds. They're not IT techies. They have people in all kinds of industries who are their gurus, who can help people build their platforms in those industries. So if you're selling art supplies, then you need someone who understands art supplies, not understands technology. And so they're very well known for, in fact, having a very diverse workforce that way. And I think that's a great thing. And so I'm reinforcing that point about the motley crew. And the last, about the culture, that's a long-term change. You really can't change culture overnight, and it really is the sum of all of your behaviors. Culture really is the manifestation of your day-to-day behaviors. And so the quote that I gave earlier about do what you need to do every day, think about what you're doing every day, that's how you change culture. Culture is like this huge ship that you can't steer, change direction overnight. Everybody has to be leaning in the right direction day after day to make it actually change.
Thank you very much, Marie. And for our last question, Alexandre.
Thanks. Alexander McGill. So a couple things that have come up that I'd like to focus on. One, the kind of concept of a bureaucracy. I've always thought a bureaucracy ensures a consistent outcome. And I'm now 10 years into my career, and I still don't understand why we haven't decided that this isn't the outcome we want. But that's why we're all here. The other one is enablement. So that kind of philosophy of management, of the institution existing to enable the people that you bring into it to accomplish our shared goals and dreams. And I think for us, that's something that we struggle with quite a bit. We're an organization that's constantly in flux, for better or for worse. We've struggled with the negative parts of that for, as far as I know, over 60 years. But because of that, we also don't change it. And I think that's kind of indicative of broader issues that we have on the nuts and bolts. We attract incredibly intelligent, incredibly passionate people who want to become diplomats, or who want to work in international development, or who want to, get somebody out of that tough position overseas when they're needed most. And I think it means we don't pay attention to those simple things that make anybody in that function's life 50% easier, or 90% easier in some cases. And we really lag behind on that front. So I wonder if you have some advice on how we can make that shift, because I think we've got the energy to become a high-performing organization, and it's on some basic performance things that I don't think we have the heart to put the effort in, and we might need a little encouragement.
Thank you. Anyone want to take this one in?
Get us out of bureaucracy.
Well, there's one thought that I wrote down in my note as I was listening to your question. Yes, bureaucracy gives you a consistent outcome, and I appreciate that. We're talking about a process, right? And if you follow a process in a certain way, you should get something that's repeatable, predictable, and so on. That's great. What was also going through my mind that I wrote down as you said that is fear of failure, fear of taking risk. And those two things work in opposition to each other. Right? And you could say that innovation's kind of thrown into the middle of all of that too. There's a trade-off there. And I absolutely appreciate that sometimes failures, I'm going to use that in quotes, hit the front page, right? When you have a failure of a certain kind. And the successes often don't hit the front page. Those are real trade-offs that you have to find the sweet spot, the right compromise or trade-off between. There is no one right answer this way or that way. It's constantly moving the yardsticks and trying to find the right balance between all of those things.
So I'm sure Francis will want to weigh in too, but I also wanted to just say, here's the thought I had that's coming to mind with this question is, so bureaucracy, things have a purpose when they arrive, and sometimes they deserve to die. So I'm just going to leave it at that. Like, actually, there is a life and ebb and flow to all things I've ever been introduced to. There are very few things that are immutable, I think is the word. So all things have a life, ebb and flow. And when you look at that first graph I showed, I don't know. Maybe it's time. And I do think I will sort of say, we have a prime minister who is now not operating like other prime ministers, the way he's operating. So that also indicates something else might be possible, I think. I'm not sure. I don't know how it occurs for you.
Just a very quick thought, because I know there's flights to catch. But you're 10 years in, I'm 20-some years in, and I feel exactly like you. So I don't know what it says about your next 10 years. But you put some word out of my mouth. There's something very comfortable about bureaucracy. I deal a lot in the legal world, and we hate legality, but boy, they're comfortable, because I'm not hiding behind it, but there is a comfort zone. And I feel there's a little bit about bureaucracy about that as well. So what I mean, and what I like about what you said, is you allude to not a bureaucracy that is out there, it's one that you also live in, like as employees we're doing it. So my conclusion to that is I've given up after 20-some years to think there's going to be a huge kind of reform on that. But there could be incremental steps. And that's where I think I'm more optimist, that when we see it, challenge the system and challenge your managers. And don't challenge them in saying, kill it. Challenge them in just tweaking it, I think is kind of where I'm going. Because there's some usefulness to it. But also we are, as employees, resisting keeping it in place because it feels safe sometimes. Nothing better than clicking a form that says, I've done it, right?
Thank you very much, Francis and Murray and Jen. If we can please give them another round of applause. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you. So just before we step out, we have some concluding remarks from our Blueprint 2020 champion, Louis Marcotte, and we have a little gathering in the Blueprint 2020 Center. So Louis, over to you.
I can tell you that I certainly found this session quite inspiring. And as was mentioned at the beginning, this is the beginning of a conversation on this concept of high-performance organization. Might be an old concept, but something that, or a 10-year-old concept, but something that we certainly want to encourage conversations around. So if you have ideas on how we do this, how we continue this conversation, please do reach out to me or to the Blueprint Vice Champion, Stuart Savage here. Our team, Ian and Jonathan, are also available for you to have discussions on that. Now, again, thank you so much for your presence today. And I'd like to welcome you to visit our refurbished, redone, recolored collaboration center. There'll be refreshments served, and we can also show a little bit of technology that was recently acquired to be used as an enabler as we want to become a high performance or higher performance organization. So thank you very much again.